Hello there. Ian has come for some more tutorials on this matter of making drama work in the classroom. And today we have a guest with us, Mrs. Varley. Bea works at the Cape School, a primary school, and she has actually been working in this method with 2 classes of children. And I thought it would be a good idea for Ian and Bea to meet so that she can share with him something of what she's been learning about as she's worked on these projects in her school. So we have Bea's class here represented, and of course we have the work that you've been doing represented. Now this first class we're going to discuss, and Ian can see what's happening, is based upon a rather tragic tale of Mary Morgan, a young woman who was hung in the 19th century for killing her child. And of course, as Ian knows, that in this work you have to frame the children so that they carry some responsibility within the work, and this drives the work forward. In the case of the Mary Morgan work then, Bea took the idea that the children would be detectives. This would be their frame of reference throughout. How can we possibly understand the mystery of how a young woman, under her living circumstances, could kill a small baby? And of course the material sounds a bit horrendous, but in fact the mystery was looked at through this 2 gravestones on one grave, one seeming to condemn her and one seeming to forgive her. And we felt this was something the children could handle. So the material is historical in one sense, but it was really based in language, wasn't it? Because it was the language and the reading particularly you wanted to begin to work quite seriously on with
Very much so,
the children.
yes.
Before we discuss how it worked, let's just have a look at some of the things the children used then from the beginning. The first thing they had were 2 representative gravestones, which Bea has just written up in this way, but the original stones that they worked on were on black paper with the proper kind of lettering that we see here in these photographs. And of course they have been to see the gravestones, haven't they?
Yes, we took them to Presteigne on a trip.
Yes,
Yes.
yes. And the other reading material they were presented with was this set of created archives. They are not original archives. They have been made by a teacher for the sole purpose of creating reading material of a very direct kind, but also a very complex kind. Now these archives are of 2 kinds, aren't they?
Yes.
One is from the actual court proceedings, statements made by the judge and so on, evidence of who the jurymen were at her trial, and others have been invented with a more human element to them. The carter who took Mary Morgan to the big house when she was 12 or 14, when she first began to work there. So this is from the point at which we began. Now I know you, Bea, had some doubts about this gruesome material.
I had tremendous doubts at the beginning because I thought to myself, when I had the offer that Dorothy was going to come into school and show us how drama can work in the primary classroom, I thought, wonderful. And then came the bombshell. We'll be investigating this material. Well, I hadn't dealt with death before, and I most certainly hadn't dealt with murder. I mean, I've been just really chuntering along with sort of, you know, the normal topics one would do. And I was just absolutely horrified. I thought, what am I going to do? I could see my own professional funeral coming about, you know, thinking, what are the parents going to say?
Wow.
How are the children going to take it? But eventually, having spoken to Dorothy, you put my mind at rest.
Well, I was glad of the warning, because you see, I hadn't realised what an interracial class you have here, what a mixed racial class.
Yes.
And I could realise your fears suddenly. I mean, with Muslim children and Sikh children, and you're the expert now on whether we should go ahead with this kind of
It's very
material.
daunting, isn't it, to think that the conventions that exist in the classroom could well be broken, and you don't know what you're going to land yourself in for. Well, that's what worries me anyway.
Well, it's breaking those conventions, believe me, where you get the best work. It's been a wonderful experience for me. It really has.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. You see, I know, and this is my problem, or at least B's problem with me, I know everything will work. I know there is no material based in human ideas and concerns that will not work because the teacher plans it carefully and very tactfully. This is what we've been on about the whole time. Now, what we need to look at then is, how did B make this work with this class of children? I believe they were mixed ability. They are mixed ability.
Very much so, very much so. But very enthusiastic, extremely enthusiastic. And this came about through the material. I learned an awful lot about the class, which I'm sure I wouldn't have done had I just followed conventions and, you know, the way that I'd been working before.
Later we might look at some of the changes that came about in you, because obviously you would approach a lesson in a rather different format with this system than you would normally have approached it.
Yes.
Now, there are 3 questions I have to ask B so that she can help Ian understand. My 3 R's, as Ian knows, are the children, can we say all the time they are working with rigour? No messing on. Is the work functioning for the purpose for which you intended it? The second thing is it creating responsibility in those children for the quality of their work and towards the material? In this case, the life of a young woman who has been dead long, long before they were born. And the third thing is the nature of how the work progresses, creating in the children a realisation of what they now know. Because if we don't reach this stage, Ian, we've been messing around, having only responsibility for it, without them being able to say, this I now understand because I've done this. So those are the 3 things. And I don't know whether you feel that in the work you did, there have been moments when you can say, yes, they did realise something. I mean, have you got an example?
Well, 2 examples that spring to mind for the rigour, first of all. The reading from the gravestones. When I first saw them, my initial reaction was, they'll never ever be able to cope with the language that's on there. But
especially as some of it's missing because the grave was old and not all the words.
That's right. But actually seeing them just crowd round the gravestones, and they were reading together, and they were all concentrating, all of them, every single one, even those that couldn't read, because I have 2 or 3 children in the class who have tremendous problems with reading. But they were so engrossed by it. And they were reading all together and trying to make sense. And Dorothy was saying to them, well, let's just read on and see what this actually means in the context that it's presented. So that was one example of the rigour. And another example was the way they ploughed through the archives. The language was difficult. I mean, it's adult language. You don't normally present that type of language to 8-year-olds.
When you look at some of this, Ian, you see you can't muck about with it. If you're really using evidence, you're using evidence. And we have here, you see, she set about the awesome task of delivering her baby, racked with pain and suffering, and confused with the worries of finding support and maintenance. It's asking children to penetrate this is a moral issue for you. You may say, no, this is not to be dealt with. But if I remember that first lesson, those children saw the word suffered there and immediately looked at child abuse.
Yes.
Now, in my day as a child, I wouldn't have even known about that.
And rape also came up.
And rape
Yes.
came up, yes, and they were 8, were they? Or
8 at the time.
years old. And so we see already how it's a diagnostic tool. You've got some material there as a result, have you, of this,
Yes,
this archive material?
normally, if you're presenting children with material like this, it usually goes in a sort of linear progression. You know, you sort of start at the beginning, it's nicely sequenced and everything follows a pattern. The children were presented with the archives in a very random fashion, and so they were divided into groups and they all had to make sense from the material that they were presented with. Now, this is an example of what a group did about the birth certificate. They had to obviously read very difficult language there, but something that sprung to mind that I wanted to share with you was the fact that because they were dealing with vocabulary that was slightly above them, one of the children, sucked up, actually wrote here that to my coordination, she obviously wants to use you know, words that she wouldn't normally use. OK, she's got it wrong, but I now know that I've got to help her with that and tell her what kind of a context she could use it in. They spent...
But she's also there picked up a legality element.
Yes,
you see,
language
she's
for the
using
purpose.
an actual to my phrase that probably she would never start a sentence with to my.
Well, she wouldn't have been
Normally.
exposed to it.
No.
She wouldn't have been exposed to it had it not been through, you know, material like this. And another example of the rigour was when the children divided into groups and had to analyse the archives. I mean, it took 2 or 3 days for them to just sift through the information at their leisure, at the time, discussing an awful lot of group cooperation to finally come out with something like this and get the sort of poignant facts that were in the archives, like Mary Morgan killed her baby with a penknife. You know, she got the penknife from a shop and nearly divided the head from the body. I mean, the facts are there.
Of course, it's pretty horrendous statements, but they found it in the archive. You see, again, you come back to your own sense of what is right for a teacher to do. I can't advise you, and I certainly wouldn't presume to advise you. I know that there will be no horror when I deal with it. Not the horror of a television image. No. There will be the compassion to understand how it might have been for such a lady under those circumstances. But you make your own choice. The problem is that frequently we choose the bland choice, and this makes an even larger separation in children's lives from what they may see around them or what they may see on the television. So school seems even more unreal in the material we present them with. It would never be my first choice to do this, but the problem of the gravestones was what attracted me, and the fact that the children could go to Presteigne and share something of why there are flowers put on this grave all the time. Who puts them on? Because that is a very compassionate thing that seems to be going on all the time in Presteigne. So to me, that made it possible to use this other material. Now, we taught a specific series of introductory lessons, and I'd like you to have a look at these with Ian, and you can keep me right if I've forgotten any. I've written them down because I need to remind myself, because we're looking always at what was going on in the children's learning during that time. So imagine a group of children grouped round a blackboard, and the question they've been asked, and interrupt me if I'm wrong here in my memory of it. They were asked, what do you think you have to do if you work like a detective? So we have a big discussion. The children were socially superb here. They could hear one another, they listened to one another, they didn't condemn each other, they were not laughing at each other. Errors of spelling, they did their own writing on the board, and so on. That was me finding out, can these children work together and this will always be a problem for you.
Mm.
When you first tackle this, how are they socially?
Yes.
According to the paradigm, you see,
Yes.
they are normally expected to work with. So the first thing is orientating and limbering up about the thing. The second thing, they had to tackle reading the gravestones. Now that's a totally different skill and another kind of diagnosis for me. They then, and this may seem very odd to you, they started to make a town map. Now you see, it's what you've said, it doesn't follow on in a normal, you know, when we've read these gravestones, what would be the sensible thing? Interiorly, the sensible thing is to make the town map, because where are these graves located? If they really exist, they have to be somewhere. So making a town map is the way to make a cemetery. Come in sideways. When they've made the town map and they place the church and the cemetery, we then have them deciding, because they have to live here now to be part of this, who are we? What are all our shops? What sort of people are we? What is life like living here? So making that town map triggered off a whole tremendous area of curriculum work. The next stage we went through was the new vicar, because the new vicar coming causes you to have to explain where the church is from the station and what the cemetery looks like. I know in the real world the vicar would have been earlier, but he couldn't have been earlier in our classroom because we only started this morning. And so orientating the vicar through the drawn streets, past all the shops, is slowly building a feeling of we live here. Very, very gently. It's not happening yet, but it's beginning to, isn't it? You could see that with that. And so they did a guided tour for the vicar. But of course the vicar then made the relationship with the gravestones, with his cemetery key, which was deliberately chosen to be either a fantasy or a reality at first. They creaked. Do you remember? They creaked the gate open. It hadn't had any WD-40 on it for years and years and years. And that became quite a feature. So now we have the vicar, the cemetery, the gravestones, and we live near there. Now that's what I call the internal coherence of the series, you see. Then we began to see what the graves would have written on them. So the children made gravestones. I believe you've got some there. And we begin to look at the language of gravestones, because you don't just write any old thing. There's a style to these things, and so on. And this raised further questions about Mary Morgan, because the vicar had never heard of her.
Yeah.
Actually, we'd only heard of her that morning.
Yeah.
But we talked as if we knew an awful lot about her, though in fact we knew nothing, except we'd pondered a lot on her suffering and what it meant to suffer. Did you get any surprises?
I was absolutely amazed at what they were coming up with. It certainly sort of brought out the multicultural element of my classroom. Like, for example, in this graveyard, Nazat, one of my pupils, wrote, Michael Stewart, aged 90, died in March 1810. He liked naan bread.
That's fascinating, isn't it? Yes.
It really personalised, you know,
Yes,
this.
yes. Now this is an example of septic teaching. You remember we've been discussing antiseptic and septic, and this is what you get with septic teaching. Antiseptic teaching, you wouldn't put that on a grave.
No.
It wouldn't be proper.
No.
Except it's what people do put on graves, isn't it, if they give them to
And their experience of life, basically, memory of Julie Peake, died from drugs, 1807. You know, which really put my mind at rest, because I thought to myself, oh my goodness, they know so much more than I credited them with, because, you know, They know about the social ill health of society.
Yeah.
You know, so what was I, really worrying about, because we were
Yes.
going to do death.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, it was all there, drugs,
Smoking, I can see that.
smoking, heart attacks,
AIDS.
AIDS, there you go, yeah, AIDS, yeah.
It's another example of the diagnostic power of this, as long as we don't leap immediately to conclusions about everything, but that we get insights that are normally hidden. Do you remember I said in an earlier tutorial, Ian, that you are inviting the authentic behaviour of children? And this is how it shows itself in this particular case of the making of the stones.
Because it tells you where they're at right now.
Yes, yes. And their relationship with death, with regard to AIDS and so on. And then this other relationship with death, which is to do with the girl having to get rid of a baby, an unwanted baby. You wonder, in fact, I wonder if your class now have paid special attention to the Irish situation, at this moment, because they may well be with the girl who has had to have the abortion and all the court business, because it would strike them, I'm quite sure, into relating with their schoolwork. I don't know what you think about that.
Well, what they keep coming up with now is just phenomenal. I mean, every time something happens on the news or in the papers, they're forever bringing in snippets of information. Don't you think this relates to Mary Morgan? And this is just like, in fact, they watched, it was Adam Bede, I can't remember now the title of the film, but there was something very, very similar in the film about a woman having to murder her child. And straight away the next day, crowds of them round my desk. Did you see it? It was just like Mary Morgan.
Was it salacious? Did you regard it as a dangerous thing that you'd done then, or not?
Oh, not at all.
You really are convinced of that?
I'm absolutely convinced.
Because I know teachers do worry about the content of the material, don't they? But frequently we mistake bland things that really are horrific if you go into them. It's so easy, you see, in words to say, and she cut her heel off so that the slipper would fit. Tell it as a lovely fairy story and it doesn't sound like horror at all. But Cinderella is full of that sort of cruelty and horror and deception, isn't it? But it doesn't seem so blatant as this, because
it's well hidden, isn't it?
Called a fairy story. Yes. And of course every teacher must decide what they're prepared to penetrate. We protect children into experience. We don't protect them out of it. We protect them into it. And therefore we are the judge of what we are prepared to do. We're responsible for our choices. And of course human affairs range from the most heroic, splendid acts to the most sordid. And you draw your line where you will, as you must have found, as you found yourself. We then had to visit the archives, the local archives with the vicar, because he needed to know more about Mary Morgan. And so this again, it seems to be jumping about, but it's not. We're always in reading. We're always in the language that's coming from this historical material that we've begun with. And of course, we then we develop further then I've lost my last page. Here we are, you see. We then begin to consider what kind of life must Mary Morgan have lived up in the big house? Who were her friends? Did she miss her parents? And so on and so on. And the material that would come available now in these terms, I don't know if you've had time to do anything of that, if they've looked at, what life was like for her.
No, that's the next thing that we're going to...
That's the next thing you're going to do. All the time, we're looking at how do you ask questions to get information, not how do you sit back and teachers give it to you. What can we initiate ourselves? And of course we did go through the way I learn in school, didn't we? Now, this is a particular thing I have. I think if a child can help itself look at the kind of worker he or she is, it seems to me we get on in a much better way. And so I'm a good starter or I'm a good finisher. We all live with this in our own lives. I mean, I'm a really good starter and I also like to finish things. You know, I reckon I'm lucky that way. But there are some people who find when they first begin work, they're great at starting, but it drops off. I wonder how many children you feel could answer all this honestly. I'm a loner. I like working alone. Or I'm a joiner. I like joining up with other people when I work. This surely is about being grown up as well. You know, how I am now is going to turn into the grown up I shall become. I like quiet when I work. I can work with muddle. I hurry my work to get it finished. These seem to me very pertinent questions that a child should ask of themselves.
When I discussed this with the children afterwards, I was amazed as the kind of predictions I'd actually made. I used to think to myself, well, you know, this one really is a slow starter. But in fact, when we talked about it, he wasn't at all.
That's interesting.
Did
you find they were able to answer this very honestly, without fear?
It took a long time. You know, I said this isn't a right or wrong answer. You know, you just have to say what you feel.
Yes.
And the bonding I actually got with the children afterwards was a lot stronger than, you know, had I just sort of said, well, why haven't you finished your work?
Yes.
You know, come on, hurry up, you've got another 10 minutes to do it.
Yes. It starts to be rather nice, doesn't it, too? I don't know if it's happened to you yet. When the children sort of say, well, you've made a good start, Mrs. Varley, but you've not finished it.
They're very honest about, you know, about even my teaching. They sort of say, well, you know, perhaps you could explain this a little bit more, or, you know, we didn't quite understand that. You know, why can't you bring something else in on it?
Yes.
Which is a very healthy relationship to have with the class.
Does that actually energise you?
Oh, absolutely.
Because sometimes it drains you, doesn't it? You're really living up to...
I feel very energised by it.
Yes, well, I
Very much
really
so.
am pleased because I feel responsible. Well, I feel very responsible to
You've got
Ian.
a lot to answer
Who's
for.
yes, I have. Put up with all this. And now, of course, he's on the brink of starting his own. Now, what I want to do here is to look at the sort of internal design of this work. So we'll clear the decks of our material for the moment, but we might need it back again. And we're going to try to map exactly how this work has fed in to the curriculum. So we have our lessons listed, and Ian and Bea will try to fit this not only into the curriculum, but to the levels in the curriculum. So we've got a lot of episodes. Now, if I come around this way, you'll be able to read that, and I'll put the lessons down. Okay. The first one was a blackboard discussion. So where do you want to place that in terms of what the children were learning?
I'd put this into English in discussion.
Right, where's that sticky so that we can just stick it down?
It's over here.
So they started with discussion.
But also it taught them a lot there what actual skills they needed in order to be able to solve a mystery. I mean, they were like, you know, asking the right question, problem solving, using their eyes, using their ears, making sure that they don't miss anything when they're talking to people. And
yes. Now, did it cause them to do any of these other aspects of language?
well, listening.
Right, draw the line down to listening then.
From here.
And any others? Did it introduce them to any other ideas? I seem to remember, but I might be wrong, that they didn't say this word, but the notion of forensic medicine, that
absolutely.
detectives often have to examine things and get evidence from the way things appear.
So I think we could actually
So
put that
you can
in.
take it in a straight line, straight down. So there was just the hint of that.
There was also, they needed a map. They
That's
wanted
right.
maps, so
Yes.
we could take
So
that into
we-
geography
it
as
was-
well.
But we don't pretend the geography's happened. All we're saying is
It's a stimulus.
that it stimulates the need of that.
Yeah.
What about anything up here? How far do you think they touched into any kind of historical concepts? Because the graves,
Yes,
not
they'd-
these graves, but the
they'd-
actual graves
they'd
had
have-
a form and a style.
I would also say that perhaps we could have gone into design and technology, because they would have had to, you know, they formulated a problem and they had to actually solve it.
Yes,
So
yes.
there's...
I don't want you to think that we're deliberately inventing things that didn't happen. What we're saying in this first discussion is it's sowing any seeds for the future work in terms of the curriculum. Now, one of the things that happens when you're teaching this way, and Ian, I think you find this has probably happened already as we've been thinking about it, is while you're engaged in one episode, in this case standing round a blackboard, you are actually, as a teacher, seeing possibilities. So what I'm going to do is put in some of the possibilities I saw at that time. Now, it seemed to me that the children would at some stage make a good working
No,
dictionary,
absolutely.
actually create their own dictionary. And I don't mean a little dictionary in a book.
No.
I mean a word that is unfamiliar, that we need to check out, certainly when we come to the archives.
Yes.
When the meaning is found, it's hung up. It's a literal clothesline. It needn't take a lot of space up. But every word is put on a card, hung up with its meaning on the back, and we go through it this way, rather like a huge card index. And it's just on a clothesline or a rod. Or it can even be hanging down on a string. It's just a bit more awkward there. And putting them in alphabetical order. Correct dictionary alphabetical procedures, you see. And a thesaurus. Because it's more than a dictionary, is this. It's a thesaurus for the sorts of concepts that lie behind some of these words. So while I was standing at that blackboard discussing with the children, this was already in my mind.
Into writing as well.
And so, of course, it would have been started off. Now, we then came to reading the gravestones. Now, would you like to process that one?
Right. Well, I'd start off with history because it's evidence. So
So we put it.
there.
Well, let's put it here
Okay.
so that we know this is the second stage. Sorry.
Shall I use another?
Yes, whatever you
coloured,
wish.
felt
All
that
we're
one?
trying to do, Ian, is follow B as to how she saw it,
Yeah.
tapping into the curriculum.
Gave me a headache, you know. I never stopped thinking. After
Yes,
this.
I know. Yes, you sort of live with it, don't you?
Major
Day and night. Right. So that went into history, and obviously the reading as well.
Yeah.
But also the private thinking, because they were making their own meaning from the gravestones.
yes,
You know,
yeah.
that was.
You can actually, if you take them straight down to just the line, we'll know.
Right.
And then you don't have to...
And it won't look so messy.
That's
I'm
right.
a messy worker.
We'll get a... Well, that's all right. We're all messy in one way or another when we work.
Also, public voice talking.
Yes. I
Because-
noticed from the very beginning the children were not afraid of the public voice. They might speak quietly, but this notion that you can speak to your colleagues was, to me, very apparent that they were prepared to do this, which says something for the school.
And also the reverence with which they read their own gravestones. I mean, you know,
Yes.
the spelling and things obviously have to be amended, but the reverence that they gave to it, I mean, they really realised that
Yeah.
that you had to treat the dead with respect.
Yes, yes, yes.
Which is quite a big thing
Yes.
for an 8-year-old.
Yes.
It's a big jump you made from reading 2 gravestones to all making one
Oh, yes.
and inventing somebody to lie in the place of the dead. Mm.
They also went on to having interaction of the ghosts.
Yes, that's right, the ghosts of the cemetery, which I didn't see. There's a whole field there of both allaying of fear and enjoying the frisson in safety about ghosts. But also all the different language, so many fine ghost stories that one could read to them or they could read for themselves. Now you see, there's a whole area that as a teacher you'd begin almost collecting some ghost stories that they themselves could handle and read and process. Because you've got a context for reading them. Was there anything else there?
Art and craft, because they wanted to design graveyards and gravestones and what patterns, and we looked at patterns on gravestones. That we would put them.
Now, of course, we are putting a dream in here. We're saying, well, look what this will lead to. I am saying it doesn't happen unless you make it possible. So all the lovely planning in the world, I've seen so many projects planned that are dream projects and they never happen. So it's a case of saying, did you do any art and craft? How did you do it? How did you reconcile the time?
My planning in this was actually retrospective. I mean, I had sort of ideas what I thought I might like to do with it, but it came from the children. The only thing that I really pushed, I think, was talking about, you know, the dead and the gravestones, was in dance. We listened to music, you know, sad music, and then created a dance to, you know, to go with that.
Was this the dance of the ghosts of the dead or the dance of the stones?
It was just dealing with death, just what it makes you feel.
Yes.
Which was...
yes.
But I
And
can
did
still
you-
develop that. I mean, that's just a starting point. I mean, I could really go to town on
Yes,
that one.
of course.
That's,
Did you feel that it was right to... Well, you must have felt it was right to do that, the business of dealing with death. But the dance, in a way, is a protection, isn't it?
very much so, yes. Oh, yes.
Now, of course, you may feel dance is out of your range, you see, but nothing's out of our range if we decide we'll have a go at it, because somebody on the staff would give a hand if you...
That's actually something that I learnt from the whole project, that I wasn't frightened anymore to have a go. Because with a conventional curriculum, I sometimes feel quite restricted, especially with something like design and technology, with all my staff will tell you, God, you know. But, you know, I wanted to do it. I thought, well, yeah, you know, we'll have a go. And the dance, you know, just came about. It was...
In an earlier tutorial, Ian and I were talking about how the teacher summons knowledge. That you have this overall feeling you don't have any knowledge in that area. I have very little knowledge in the area of mathematics. But when I summon it, because I require it, what I also summon is who can help me with this. And then the will begins to happen, that I limp along as well as I may with the best help I can get. And this, you do realise you do know a lot more.
Yes.
And it's a lovely way to interact with staff that you normally wouldn't work with. I mean, I asked the mathematician to help me out on, you know, sort of how many people can you fit into a graveyard, because I didn't know.
No.
And she was absolutely wonderful about it, and it was good for the
Yes.
children.
Yes.
We all learnt from it.
Yes, of
It was
course.
a really good learning
Yes.
experience.
Now, one spin-off here that I was considering as I was working on the initial reading of the gravestones, none of the big follow-up you've done since, was this business of really looking at lettering styles, which a graveyard is a gift for, but also ordinary print. Books have hundreds of different kinds of types, settings, spacings, paginations, marginations, and so on. And I would see that as a very big way of opening an awful lot of books. Doesn't matter what kind of books they are, but just looking at the structure of this object that is full of these words that I can penetrate. And the margins have an effect on me. When I read, the margins round my gravestones have an effect on me when I read, and so on. I also considered this business of measurements and proportion, you know. How big is a grave feeling? How big is a grave and how big is a grave feeling? Because they're two different understandings of dimensions. You've only to look at Juliet in that tomb, waiting. That's a grave feel. But how big is a grave is your mathematician. So you've immediately got two whole different areas of understanding. And then, of course, the marvellous business that I can't resist because I'm married to an engineer. How does a tool do its work on stone? What can you do with a tool on stone? At what cost to stone and carver? In that day and age, how was time when you carve these words on a stone? And when you carve those words on a stone compared with these words carved on a stone. And of course all the business of stone types, soft and hard, and
That takes you
old
straight
and
away into
mossy and
science.
so on. So you see, to me there was a whole world there. Have you got a bit of blue tack here? That I would want to develop. And I'm doing it not because I'm saying I've got to get into the curriculum, but I can't help get into the curriculum. There is no need to invent. The world is waiting. It's all sensible. It's in a context. Nobody's going to argue with it. It's logical. If you take the vicar round the churchyard, this is waiting. Or just reading these stones, it's waiting. When I introduce them all, of course, will depend upon just what seems to be a time now. They've enough inside, they've enough knowledge to go at this one with some depth, and so on. And then we came on to making the town map. Now, I don't know where you want to place this.
In geography. Oops.
Now, this has given rise to the need of that. This is what we've been saying all
Yes,
along, Ian,
where
in these...
that's your,
in
your
these
internal
tutorials.
coherence, in a sense, isn't it? You've got to, they've got to connect together.
That's right. That's right.
Interesting thing in watching this is that how often I feel with the curriculum we're dealing in very broad brushstrokes of, you know, sort of in a very general sense, and we're talking now about the pinpoint work here, much more than that very grand scene.
Well, you see, Ian's learned his lesson. If you would do good to anyone, you must do it in minute particulars.
Absolutely.
And this is minute particulars. And of course, I don't know if time has ever fretted you, because I do hear teachers saying, there won't be time for all this.
I think that's one of the, perhaps the biggest lessons I've learnt, is that I am not going to be put off by time, because I'm working for quality now. I'm not interested in the quantity anymore. I mean, before it was how many attainment targets can I get through? You know, how wonderful I am. I've done all of this through a topic. But yes, I have. I mean, in this particular topic, I've done, you know, I've covered loads and loads of attainment targets, but in a year, not in the 6 weeks.
That's right.
You know,
Yes.
that you get, because the quality of work that the children have produced, for me, just says it all.
Yes.
Yeah,
There's some attainment target numbers just under the archives. They're at the front, just under the key.
Right.
What sort of attainment targets would you say were hit in terms of levels in that Blackboard discussion?
Level 5, definitely. In Key Stage 2, Level 5.
As early as that,
Yeah.
you were hitting level 5?
Absolutely, because
That's
they were...
amazing. Does that reassure you, or don't you? I don't know. Either I was very clever, or it worked right. Let's put a figure down then. Here.
I did actually attainment target
Where's the
these,
evidence for level 5 on that Blackboard discussion, do you think?
I've got it down here. Give well organised and sustained account of an event. Well organised and
Yes.
sustained account.
Yes.
which is extremely important in
What
this,
about the work here then in reading the gravestones?
reading the implications and considering.
You seem to have a
meaning.
chart there. Have you been
Yes, I've been working
developing a
very.
way to
This,
fill it in?
this was actually something that Guy Williams developed when he worked on Tudors and Stuarts that we're actually using in school at the moment. It was what you have is you have the curriculum areas down the side. It's called National Curriculum Pupil Profile Through Drama, Cape Hill Pilot Study, because we're involved with Birmingham Poly on working on this. You have the national curriculum areas, the attainment targets and the levels, and it's a lovely way of actually keeping all your material in order, you know, knowing what they've hit. And as I say, this is done retrospectively because I have another planning document, you know, that I start off with, this is what I'm going to do.
Yes.
And then, at the end of all this, I like to compare as to what my expectations were and what the children actually did.
Yes, yes. So what level are we working at when these children are reading these gravestones?
Finding out evidence. No, that was from the maths, carrying out a task in which information is needed. Guarantee this will be the one that's not on here.
Well, that's all right, but you can make an intelligent guess at this from your memory of it.
Yes,
I
I would say that's around about level 4, level 5 in the reading as well.
So we've got 4, 5 here. Let's have a 4, then we don't pretend something's happened that it hasn't. Is this high for these children? I mean, I don't know the children like you do.
Yes,
Or
it
is this
high for
about
them.
average for what you'd have expected?
No, for this particular class this is quite high.
It's coming
I'm just
high.
going to have a look here. Yes, in level 4, read aloud expressively, fluently, with an increased confidence.
Yes, that certainly occurred within the first 10 minutes.
Right.
What about reading for understanding? Because it seemed to me they read from the very beginning with this deep understanding that something very sad happened to this girl, but they weren't quite sure whether it was her fault.
I would say demonstrate in talking and reading about stories, poems and other texts, obviously our gravestones, that they are developing their abilities to use inference, deduction. That
was certainly there. I mean, in the first 10 minutes again. What does suffered mean?
Very much so.
And so on. That's very interesting. Now, we were looking at, where's our third one? Making the map.
It's down here.
So, how far is making the map going to introduce us to different aspects of the curriculum?
Well, the discussion that went on. You know, you're going to put it here. No, you're not. It's the wrong place to put it. Put it over
it's all
there.
right. You go on. I'm trying to find...
that would go over here. If you just pass that one over, Ian, I'll show you what they actually did. This is the map that they made of Presteigne.
Well, this was the earliest... and of course I see you did some teacher aids here because all the places are written as well on cards.
I did that for the children who were having actual problems with reading. They were my flashcards that we went over.
Yes.
Just you know, just as an exercise, 10-15 minutes in the morning to familiarise them with.
Yes. And what did they do with them? Did they place them in the right place? Did they match them? What were they doing?
there was matching, and you know, sort of. I took
and
a
of
few
course
there.
you used some
You know, choose one,
there.
see if you can.
Yes.
Oh yes, we went into that as to how spelling has actually changed over the years.
The tea shop, the tea shoppy. Yes.
And then they just choose one and match it up. This is for the ones with the with the poor
So how long
reading
did it
ability.
take them to do that?
This is about 2 to 3 weeks' work.
Yes.
Because there was so much negotiation going on as to whether we actually thought that the Chinese takeaway should be near a gas showroom.
You see this widening of the reference areas that comes in. Do you remember when we made the map of Jerusalem with a piece of cloth? Now their first map was a piece of cloth, wasn't it?
That's
we
right.
all sat round it so that 30 children or 28 or whatever could all get round that
Yes.
big map first. And we put our roads on, and then you've gradually organised it until eventually it can be, it can have an orientation on it and be made to scale, of course, depending upon how far you want to go with it.
This is pinned up in the classroom normally, and when they've got about, 10 minutes at the end of the day or something, they've actually invented characters and people, real people who live in the area, and they just interact with each other quite
Yes.
naturally.
I once ran a project like this for a year, based on an invented village, nothing to do with like the real Mary Morgan. And there, the children ended with biographies, personal biographies, or autobiographies, then biographies, then a history of the village right through from the Bronze Age. And at the end of the year, when it came to July about the 9th, I was very worried. By now they'd designed their houses, they knew all their crafts, trades, and every week we had a different adventure, right? A bit like the Archers, only we had an adventure that sorted itself out in a week. Like a cow died on the farm, we had to have a dog put down, which caused great sorrow. A cat was run over. The doctor's daughter had to decide whether she went to college or not. It was this kind of thing going on. And I wondered what would happen to the village. I rather fretted about it, because where would it go? It was interesting that our very last meeting, unfortunately, there was a terrible fire. And they burned the village. Nobody else was going to get it. The village was burned. And I said, this seems very radical, as we put our houses into a metaphoric bonfire, and said our last words. And the child said, but that's how it has to be, because it's our village. And I thought it was a neat way to get through it, but it was devastating. I didn't know how we would manage it. And,
It's grim, isn't it? Yeah.
So there we were, you see, with a whole year. Now, when I look at the spin-off, here in there are more spin-offs for the cemetery that I've forgotten, because I have such a fertile imagination that I sort of bombard myself with possibilities. When they were reading these gravestones, and I mentioned this, there's a whole other area, for example, to consider solutions about tombstones, 2 gravestones. Writing press reports for people as to why we think there are 2 at Presteigne. What does the vicar say in that Sunday sermon? What might we advise him to say when he's new to the parish? Should he mention at all this history of Mary? And the minutes of meetings when we discuss with the vicar how we feel about this gravestone, and so on, and the nature of consecrated ground and the boundaries, because remember she was buried outside the consecrated ground, and later it was enclosed.
When we went to Presteigne, that's one of the questions they asked the vicar there. Isn't it about time that you did something to clean up the gravestone so that people can see?
Yeah, how did you take it? I like that. How did you take it?
Very well, yes, very well.
Did they get the impression that he understood about that, the importance of those gravestones?
They felt that he spent more time showing them the church than staying with them and explaining about the gravestones.
Yes.
But he was marvellous. I mean,
Yes.
they made flowers, out of tissue paper, these gaudy colours, and the cemetery was absolutely littered with them.
When they left. And did they clear them all off?
Oh, we did, yes. Oh, we did, yes, because we need to go back again.
Now, Ian, you are going to have a lot more to do on this, because you've got about 18 lessons to go through here. In this tutorial, I haven't time to take you right through, but Bea will inexorably, won't you?
Absolutely.
Because of what you know. But I'd like to just make these points and see whether you agree with me. First of all, working like this, do you agree that it does involve constantly the social behaviour of your class?
Oh, yes.
And has that developed in any way?
Very much so. Very much so. Children are not afraid to... I mean, they know who's got a problem. They know who, for example, is a poor reader, or they know who is a good writer.
Yeah.
And if they need help, they go to the person who can give them that help. They don't always come to me.
Which can relieve you to a certain extent.
Very
Yes.
much so. And they're very aware of each other's needs.
Yes.
And
yes.
I've had the class for 2 years now.
Yes.
And I can certainly say that you know, the social climate of the class has improved tremendously.
Yeah.
So we're talking about social behaviour, we're talking about academic skills, are we?
Yes.
There really
Oh,
is
yes.
evidence of this.
Oh, yes.
And academic knowledge and information. So you see, Ian is going to have to constantly consider these three things. The social behaviour begins gradually to allow more and more complex work to be undertaken by the children without you constantly
Yes.
having to drive it. The second thing is there enough knowledge being gained to make this worth doing? And is that gaining of knowledge developing their skills to begin to be learners? We are learners all our lives. And it begins in school, doesn't it? So,
Yes, they're just actually getting into inquiring, and inquiry is part of learning, isn't it? I mean, it's about eager to be finding out more information.
I would have thought it's the key, really, to be an inquirer.
Yes. Yes, that's what you
So, we come to lesson 4. Placing the shops and the families. So where do we put this?
Well, it can either go under geography or it can go under design and technology if you're going to plan a town. So
And you
you've
can
got
put your emphasis wherever you think.
You've got a
My
choice.
instinct would be, if I've started here with a strong
yeah.
geography,
Go
I would
on,
probably
put it on
develop
the-
it better by putting it up here.